Hey everyone, this is the flipped version of the Latin American movements for independence. I am speaking in hushed tones because my children are sleeping, so hopefully they stay that way. Okay, so there's this expression that when France sneezes, Europe catches a cold, and that nationalism spread all throughout Europe, and so did Enlightenment ideas. Those germs also, if you will, made their way across the Atlantic to Latin America. You may remember, now if it's in purple, by the way, purple, those are connections to ninth grade. So you can write them down or not. They're already in your ninth grade notes. It's up to you. So just in case you forgot, Latin America is very diverse. It's very uh, topographically diverse and geographically diverse, and there's many different cultures there. Last year we talked about the Olmecs and the Toltecs, but we talked really mostly about the Mayas, Aztecs, and Incas. So just to remind you, it's just very, very culturally diverse. You may remember too that old imperialism. We're going to talk about new imperialism in the near future, but that old imperialism is when Spain and Portugal, along with the British and the French, the Portuguese, came over and established colonies. They used this territory for growing cash crops, and the economic policy that they were following was called mercantilism. It's when they were exporting more than they were importing, and those colonies guaranteed markets for their goods as well as cheap access to cash crops. When they got to Latin America and they started conquering, they established those large encomiendas. You may remember them. Basically, it was a way of enslaving the Native Americans, but the Native Americans kept dying on them. So the Spanish, the Portuguese, the Brits, they started to use slaves from Africa. Um, excuse me. So they had these colonies in the New World an ocean away, and they did micromanage them with audiencias and viceroyalties. And basically, what that means is they had little mini European governments controlling the Latin American colonies. So, I know there's no pictures on the slide, I'm so sorry. But there were multiple causes to the Latin American revolutions. Our revolution, the American Revolution, was a huge influence because we inspired the French Revolution. So the French Revolution happened. They successfully overthrow a monarch, and okay, fine, Napoleon comes to power, and they, eventually ends up back being having an absolute ruler. But the French did successfully overthrow a monarch. And there's that phrase. It's a catchphrase, if you will. When France sneezed, Europe and Latin America caught a cold, because these ideas just spread around. The Enlightenment was a cause for the Latin American movements for independence, because the elite Latin Americans, the Creoles. Now you may remember last year we talked about the different social classes in Latin America. You had the Peninsulares on top, the Creoles, then you had the mestizos and mulattoes, and then you had the slaves and the mixed slave and native. Well, Peninsulares were born on the peninsula, the Iberian Peninsula. They're European, and they had the most power there at the top. The Creoles, who are the descendants of the Peninsulares, they have a lot of money, but they don't have a lot of power. It's very similar to the bourgeoisie of France, saying, hey, wait a minute, we have all this money, we have no power. That's not logical. That doesn't make sense. So those ideas inspired them to rebel against the established political authorities that governed them. And our boy Napoleon helped out a lot too, because when he goes into Spain and wreaks havoc there, the governments of Spain and Portugal couldn't effectively control their territories, and this destabilizes Spain and Portugal, allowing the territories to start to come up with their own ideas and take advantage of the weaknesses on the Iberian Peninsula. So King João of Portugal actually flees to Brazil, reestablishes his monarchy in Brazil. That's a funny story. We'll get to that in a little bit. Okay, the Haitian Revolution is truly one of the most amazing revolutions ever. It's a slave uprising. So if you're ever asked to compare, let's say, the American Revolution or the French Revolution to the Haitian Revolution, sure, the Americans and the French were fighting against established political authorities. They were fighting for independence and more freedoms and more rights. The Haitians were fighting not just for more freedoms, but freedom in general. Haiti had a massive slave population. For every white person, there were 10 slaves, and you can see on the chart. I mean, it's a massive, massive slave population, and it's something called chattel slavery, and that's the slavery that you're the most familiar with. There's various kinds of slavery, but chattel slavery is the kind where where they're the forced labor, brutal, absolutely brutal in Haiti. Sugar was a big commodity here, sugar cane, and just the back-breaking work and the complete mistreatment. It was hell. It was absolute hell on earth. So this guy over here, Toussaint Louverture Breda, we just usually refer to him as Toussaint Louverture. He was an educated slave. He taught himself how to read and write, and he was reading literature from the enlightened philosophers to want more rights and to motivate the people, motivate the other slaves for rising up. Um, it's not the first slave rising for sure, but it is definitely the biggest slave rising, and eventually they reach success. Um, a lot of people will die in the process, but they eventually reach success. So their tactics were machetes and guerrilla tactics to kind of catch the French off guard. It wasn't traditional style of fighting, which the French were used to at the time. Um, the Enlightenment ideas of liberty, equality, and fraternity kind of contradicted this whole idea of slavery. So you have the French revolutionaries back home in France, like, well, slavery really isn't cool, and if we're all guaranteed these natural rights of liberty, freedom, equality, which means we shouldn't have slaves, and fraternity, that as humans we're all brothers, how can slavery be a good idea? But then at the same time, it's like, but we need them. So it was just really this interesting hurdle that the revolutionaries had to figure out. And Toussaint, used his education to try to win over some of the revolutionaries to say, hey, this having our independence, having our freedom, like this is what you're promoting. But as we always say, everybody's equal, but some are more equal than others. So France didn't love the idea of Haiti getting its independence. So in 1801, Toussaint liberated slaves in the Dominican Republic, as you probably know this, but if you don't, you will in the future, that Haiti and the Dominican Republic are the two countries on the island of Hispaniola. So the French they make a deal with Toussaint. They say, you know what, Toussaint, we need to talk, we need to chat. Why don't you come chat with us? We have this treaty, we'll give peace a chance. So he goes to meet with the French, and they're like, fooled you. And they take him prisoner, ship him across the Atlantic to the Alps, where he's put in prison in the French Alps, and he dies there. He dies in that French prison, which is kind of sad because a year later, Haiti gets its independence. So Toussaint doesn't live to see it, but his efforts were not in vain. So Toussaint's actions inspired other slaves for sure. But what's interesting is that he did inspire upper class whites because, and again, not because these upper class whites felt like, that Africans were their equal or Africans should be free or anything like that. But it was more like, well, hey, if those Haitian slaves can do it, why can't we? So it wasn't like an equality, we're all in this together thing. It was like, well, if they can do it, why can't we do it? So it's almost a derogatory um, inspiration, if you will. The video you see there, that's John Green's recap of the Haitian Revolution. I will post this slideshow in Google Docs as well, or actually not Google Docs, in Google Classroom, so you can click through and watch it, or you can just even do a Google search. It's called Haitian Revolutions Cross Course History, World History 30, and he does a great job doing an overview of the whole thing. I'm really giving you just the bare bones ideas of it. Okay, so there was this country in South America called Gran Colombia, and it was very short lived. I'm talking only 13 years. But, originally, what some of these revolutionaries wanted was to even have a United States of South America, kind of echoing what we did in North America. Of course, that doesn't really work out so much because it is so culturally diverse, and the topography does not lend itself to unification. But Simon Bolivar, he's the guy. He wanted that United States of South America, and what he was able to establish was the Gran Colombia. He was educated in Europe. He's from Venezuela as although he's from Venezuela. I'm so sorry, I'm stumbling over. I'm really tired. And he's considered to be the George Washington of South America. He was inspired by Napoleon, who just rose up and, successfully led this wave of accomplishment and success and of conquering across Europe. And he was a military strategist as well. But unfortunately, his vision dies along with him. He gets really sick, and he dies, which kind of ruins his whole dream and vision. But again, the topography of Latin America just does not allow for unification. And then culturally, they're very different as well. It was just too diverse to bring into one country. Brazil, as you know, if you go there, you will speak Portuguese because they were Portugal's largest colony and most important colony. Portugal and Spain and truly the Dutch, they led the way with that old imperialism. Back in the late 1400s and the 1500s, it was really the Portuguese and the Spanish that were going around and getting colonies and setting up ports. But by 1822, not so much. They were really on the demise down. They tried to encourage miscegenation, which is that interracial breeding. So you have Europeans and natives, and they were trying to say, see how awesome we are, see how equal we are. Like we're a racially egalitarian society. We embrace everybody. We encourage miscegenation. But it was a front because, of course, the Europeans had the better end of the deal. The mixed races did not have as many opportunities, and then even the ones born, like the Creoles in the Spanish colonies, just because you have European descent doesn't mean you had all the power. You might have had money, but not power. And Brazil had a massive slave population, and of course, they mistreated their slaves just like everybody else mistreated their slaves. Slavery is never this father figure slave owner raises these wonderful, not educated but needy slaves, and he guides them and encourages them. No, he works the crap out of them to make as much money off he can, and if they die in the process, he'll just pay to replace them because it's cheaper that way. It's all about money. It's never an okay thing. All right, I'm going to pause here, and I have to, I'll start the next one up,